Chapter 5. Then HSS book. Chapter most probably 7. Then Porter Sterling book. The chapters on solidification and solid state nucleation, or any other standard books you can follow. So, first of all, this formation of an embryo or nucleus, observing it is very difficult. If you want to study nucleation, you need to observe the nucleus. That is very difficult. So, what usually is done is they resort to a particular model and of nucleus, then come up with a nucleation rate as a function of temperature, composition and other variables. Then they measure the nucleation rate and validate the model. Now, how to measure the nucleation rate? Anything comes to your mind, just say. How to measure a nucleation rate? How will you measure? Just whatever comes to your mind. What is nucleation rate? How do you define it?
Number of cell take home.
Number of nuclei per unit volume per unit time. Per unit volume, how many number of nuclei that is forming per unit time. That is the nucleation rate. So one of the direct method of, you have to observe the nucleus, but you can observe only if it is of size of which you can observe. So starting from the critical nucleus size to that observable size, after it gets to that size you can observe. So you measure at different you take different samples, you hold it at that temperature at which you want to measure the nucleation rate for different length of time, and count the number of observable size, observable volume of the product. So you have different time, for different time, different samples, you count the number, you will get the nucleation rate. Now you usually, what you do, you take a 2D section to measure the count. So you actually have to not only have the number count, but also the size distribution of what size, how many number of what size. And then stereological method is there, which from 2-dimensional information you can get the 3-dimensional number per unit volume thing. Here one implicit assumption is there that starting from the critical nucleus size to the observable size, this time taken is same for a nucleus which formed earlier and which formed later. But this assumption is valid only for the case where your matrix composition is not changing. For example, discontinuous reaction. As we discussed yesterday, until that interface between product and parent sweeps over part of the matrix, that matrix composition remains unchanged, or diffusion-less transformation, where matrix phase composition remains unchanged. There you can take this assumption that growth rate as a function of time is same for the nucleus which is forming later and which is forming earlier. But for the continuous transformation case, where continuously your matrix is getting drained of your composition, there this assumption is not correct. The second method, a more quick method of finding nucleation rate, is what they do is for a particular fraction transform, whatever the time required. The first one is number you count, and for different time of sample, you hold the sample at for different time, different sample for different time at the temperature, you count the number. Second one is to measure these. For a fraction transform, fixed fraction transform, measure the time. This should be inversely proportional to the initial nucleation rate. Nucleation rate sometimes we can denote by n dot, or sometimes we can denote by I. So how you denote, don't pay much attention, but it is inversely proportional to nucleation rate. But you see, it will be your time required for a fraction transform will be inversely proportional to nucleation rate. This statement is valid only when the growth rate is not coming into picture. Because time rate required for a fixed fraction transform, in it both growth and nucleation is involved. So in diffusion-less transformation, where the growth rate is very rapid and growth rate is not a function of temperature, then we can take this assumption that time required is inversely proportional to nucleation rate, or the overall transformation rate is just the nucleation rate. So it is, then you measure T alpha as a function of temperature, you will get n dot or I as a function of temperature. But in the cases where that is not the case, the growth rate is also coming into picture, then the growth rate and nucleation rate, they have different function of temperature, and also the growth and nucleation as a function of alpha, that is different. So there, if this method will be applicable, this method is applicable only when diffusion-less transformation where growth rate you can ignore, because it is very rapid and not a function of temperature. The third method is just you overall transformation rate. If you have a function as nucleation rate and growth rate, sometimes growth rate can be either you denote by this or you denote by R dot. Nucleation rate you denote by this or you denote by I. So if you have this type of function and measure, you experimentally measure T dot, that is overall transformation rate, and you experimentally you measure growth rate. Then if you have these two measured experimentally, you can find the nucleation rate. But validity of this equation, what in overall transformation, the rate equation of the transformation rate, how it is dependent on growth rate and nucleation rate. Whether that equation is valid or not, that will determine whether this method will give you right nucleation rate or not. So these are few comments about how to measure nucleation rate. Now what happens in nucleation? So what is the difference? What is homogeneous nucleation, Parul? Be loud. When nucleation starts in the same phase, in the parent phase.
No preferable site is present. No preferable site is present.
No preferable site is present. That is a better one. Yours is correct, but partially. This is the random nucleation site. Means anywhere in the matrix or the parent phase, randomly it can nucleate anywhere. There is no preferred site. If it is preferred site, then it is heterogeneous nucleation. Now this homogeneous nucleation can happen only if your parent is completely homogeneous, compositionally and structurally and energetically. Every volume element of the parent phase has same composition, same structure, and energetically they are same. That can happen if your parent is homogeneous in terms of composition and structure, and there is no defect in it. If there is defect, then atoms situated at the defects will be of high energy. So if nucleation happens there, already high energy site is available, so the extra amount of required energy for the nucleation to happen is required less. So heterogeneous nucleation is always preferred, or happens much easily compared to homogeneous nucleation. Now, at temperatures at which atomic mobility is sufficient, any high temperature, then always the atoms rearrange themselves, form a cluster, and those are very instantaneous in nature because of thermal agitation that happens. Now, if the phase is thermodynamically stable, then those clusters that form, they immediately dissolve back. At some other place they may form, but that keeps on happening. But if you are at a temperature where the phase is metastable, then those formation of the clusters because of thermal agitation becomes important. And as you know, if they form above a critical size, they become stable nucleus. Now these fluctuations of the clusters that form, in reality they may vary in size, shape, composition and structure. And it may not be the case that those embryos or the clusters that are forming, those are compositionally or structurally homogeneous. In reality, the embryos that form, they may be of different size, may be of different shape, may be of different composition, may be of different structure, and inside one embryo also it may not be homogeneous. But for the classical nucleation theory, which was originated by Holman and Weber, in 1925, and Baker and Doring in 1935. There the assumptions are the simplest model is to assume that the embryos are internally homogeneous and they have the same structure, composition and properties as the final product. So those are the assumptions of and those are the basis of the classical nucleation theory which were originated by this book more than 94 years ago, around that. So if we take those assumptions of embryos to be compositionally, structurally homogeneous and they have same composition, structure and properties as the final product, then we are left with two variables. One is size, one is shape. Now shape of any product that forms in a parent, that is mainly determined by the surface tension. It's all the other energies which are related with, like it's not only the energy associated with between the two phase boundary energy, but also the strain energy if volume of the product that is forming is different than the volume of the matrix from which that is formed. That volume difference gives strain energy. Also there can be coherency energy, like if the interface is coherent or semi-coherent, then some lattice strain energy will be associated with it. So shape is function of nature of the interface and the orientation relationship of the product between the product and the matrix. The optimum shape is closely linked with the nature of the interface and existence of crystallographic relationship between the phases. Now, if you assume the interfacial energy to be isotropic, independent of the crystallographic orientation, and if you neglect the volume strain energy, then the shape that gives the minimum surface energy is spherical. And for that spherical shape, you are left with the only variable is size. Then you use the classical nucleation theory to get that size from the thermodynamics, that is delta G of formation, gives free energy of formation of the nucleus will be 1/4 pi r cube. R cube is the size of the, r is the size, radius of the embryo, multiplied by delta GV. What is delta GV? Volume. So it's a Gibbs free energy if in alpha a beta phase forms. This is the difference in Gibbs free energy between beta and alpha per unit volume of beta. Per unit volume of beta. Plus 4 pi r square gamma. What is gamma? Interfacial energy between alpha and beta. Now usually gamma here for our theory, gamma is assumed to be not function of size. Can you see this side? This whatever written? Nothing? Now, this is always positive term. And this first term is negative when at a temperature where beta phase is stable compared to alpha phase. But it is positive at a temperature where alpha phase is stable, it is positive. The whole delta G will be positive. So at that temperature, embryos of all sizes are unstable. However, statistically there is a steady state distribution of size of embryos. Size distribution meaning number for a particular size. So there is a steady state distribution of size of embryos. The individual embryos may be growing at a particular instant, some other embryos may be shrinking back, but statistically a steady state distribution, size distribution of embryos remain even at a temperature above the beta phase is stable. Now that size distribution is characteristic of a temperature. Different temperature, your size distribution is different. Now where beta phase is stable, the first term is negative